G'day, Glenn Morris here from the Smart Energy Lab. I'm here today with Luke Konynenburg, the CEO of Green Energy Group. G'day, Luke.
How you doing?
How's your day been?
It's been really good so far. Thanks, Glenn.
Well, thanks for coming up to the Smart Energy Lab. For those who don't know you, tell us a bit about the company you work for.
Yeah, no problems. So the company that most of you might be aware of is Green Energy Trading. So we've been a rec agent, aggregator and trader working in the solar and renewables and also energy efficiency schemes for nearly 18 years. A few years ago, we purchased a company in New South Wales called National Carbon Bank of Australia. It does similar kinds of things. And so we needed a way to describe ourselves that was a bit more inclusive. So that's where the Green Energy Group came from. Yes. So there's a couple of other little components to the business as well that are really important as well. But yeah.
Well, I've been a client of yours for almost all that time.
Wow.
In fact, you're really the OG of rec trading.
Well, look, I think if I'm being completely upfront, Greenbank beat us by a few months. But yeah, we've been around. The two of us are probably the oldest established.
The OGs, yes. We'll call you. Yes,
very much so. And particularly, my boss Rick Brazzali, been involved for an awful long time. And was came to this. I think that was kind of very natural the way he came into this. He was the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy for about 10 years. That was later merged with the Wind Council and became the Clean Energy Council we know about. So a natural fit for him to move into this space.
Well, certificates have really changed. I mean, it used to be just the RECs, and then we started calling them STCs and LGCs. And now we've got this new BSTC, maybe. I'm not sure if that's the right name for it, but we'll get more onto that in a bit.
Yeah.
But what about the National Carbon Bank? What's that all about?
Yeah, so National Carbon Bank is basically was kind of like our counterpart in New South Wales. Had a big footprint in the New South Wales energy efficiency scheme, and we'd been sort of competing in friendly competition for several years. The owner had built a fabulous business and was, looking to move on to other things. And it was one of those cases. It was just a beautiful timing and a beautiful match for us. So it's been a big component. It's meant we can have sort of boots on the ground in New South Wales, and we can contribute and be part of the conversation up there around the scheme development as well.
I've actually had quite a bit to do with your team up in New South Wales because I ran a little course for them on batteries, and you wouldn't believe the number of questions that come back because it is one of the most confusing areas about where can I put a battery. Fun fact, I have done some videos on that too, so you might want to, if I remember, I'll link it up here. But yeah, batteries are really what we're going to be talking a bit about today in the realms of creating certificates for the renewable energy that they store, not generate. It's a big difference, right? So let's get into the tech a little bit. How do you assess the current supply and demand balance in Australia, considering LGCs, STCs, and this new cheaper home battery scheme that's going to start next week?
So again, not 100% sure exactly where everybody who's listening is at. So a very quick sort of a précis of the market. In Australia, we have LGCs, which are a certificate awarded for systems above 100 kilowatts.
What does LGC stand for? Large
Scale Generation Certificate. Yes, absolutely. So large scale certificates can be wind, can be solar, can even be hydro and things. So that's systems above 100 kilowatts. Systems below are eligible to create STCs or small scale technology certificates. And so those are the two main parts. So the current supply-demand balance in LGC world, so in the big market, is we are creating too many, which means that there's downward pressure on the price. And so the outlook for LGCs is lower prices. And that's what we're sort of dealing with and what we're seeing over the forward market. That's not unexpected. We've seen it's a victim of its own success. This is what the scheme was meant to accomplish, and it's doing that in spades. But we're at this point now where the amount of install capacity is spinning off more LGCs than the market demand exists for it.
So this is part of the large scale scheme,
Yes.
which expires, is it 2030?
2030 is when it's due to run out.
Yep.
And there's a lot of things that could come next. So we're sort of, we're very open to a couple of possibilities at the moment. The first one is that there's quite a strong voluntary demand for LGCs. So you might have heard of people and companies surrendering offsets or certificates to hit their carbon neutral goals. LGCs are one way to do that for your, we call it off-site solar. So if you can't put solar on your building, or you can't put enough solar on your building, LGCs or the more even the more robust model of green power is a way to get effectively off-site renewables. So that there are a lot of people. I think it's around. There's a substantial demand for that each year, and so we see that there could potentially be some demand for LGCs post 2030. There's also the Guarantee of Origin scheme that the regulators are speaking of at the moment, which will provide, as the name says, it's supposed to provide some sort of certainty, some sort of stamp that can say that this energy came from a renewable source. And again, that might come in really handy for companies that are trying to meet their emissions targets and reduce their on-site consumption. The other one that could come into play is it's theoretically possible to create ACCUs at the moment for solar plants. Another acronym. So Australian Carbon Credit Units, which fall under our Emissions Reduction Fund, or ERF, puts a target on basically the top 100 biggest polluters in Australia, and they have to purchase these certificates to offset any emissions they can't reduce. So it is possible to create ACCUs for solar at the moment. It's complicated, it's expensive, but the outlook for ACCU prices is to go substantially over the next few years. Currently, they're about $35, but yeah, they're forecast to move closer to 100 over the next couple of years. So we could see that changing.
So what does one ACCU certificate represent?
So one ACCU is 1 tonne of CO2 abated. So it's similar to the Victorian and, well, actually, I won't. They have slightly different models too, but it's basically a tonne of CO2 abated.
Right. Now, you mentioned green power. Can you explain what green power is?
Yeah, so green power is basically it's a government certification, a scheme that was set up to allow people basically to buy off-site renewables. And that works particularly well for businesses that where it's really popular is in something like a shopping centre or an embedded network where you've got a whole bunch of different retailers. They might not be able to choose green power. They might not be able to choose a green power product from their electricity retailer. So what they're able to do under the green power scheme is basically buy the power, the energy itself, from whoever they want, and then they buy a matching certification, if you like, a certificate to say that we matched up whatever we used. We matched up with an amount of guaranteed renewable energy from the last 15 years. So it's new, it's additional, it's just quite a high grade of renewable certification.
Because I noticed my local supermarket has a sign saying we run on 100% renewable energy.
Right.
And it's one of the big chains.
Gotcha.
So they've got no solar panels on their roof. So obviously they are purchasing certificates to offset their consumption.
It could be, or they could have a bunch of solar plants somewhere.
Oh, I see. Yep.
So
remote.
So all of that could be true.
Yeah.
There's been a few fairly high-profile cases where some organisations have used what might be judged to be low-grade sort of offset, and they've been called into question about it. So again, that's why it's nice to have things that are well understood, well backed up, and well supported. And green power, I'd say, is one of those. LGCs, again, we know what an LGC is. So, yeah.
Cool.
Very much so.
Now, I just realised I mentioned the Cheaper Home Batteries program, but I didn't actually explain what it is for those who don't know. And for those who've been living under a rock, it's the biggest news in the renewable energy industry for as long as I can remember, which is the federal government announced a $2.3 billion fund already in the budget for approximately 1,000 home battery systems. And in fact, it's not just for homes, it's for businesses and homes on-grid or off-grid. Up to the first 50 kilowatt hours of capacity will be able to access this rebate. Now, we're possibly one day away or even a few hours away from the actual regulations being published. So we don't know the fine detail, but what the Minister has said, Chris Bowen, is that it will be producing 9.3 STCs per kilowatt hour. That's how they'll run the scheme.
That's how they're saying it, yes.
So STC, small scale technology certificates, which are really for solar generation.
That's correct.
How does that work then? It's not solar, it's a battery.
No, it doesn't. I don't think it does work. But I do agree that this is a very expedient and a very sensible way to get battery support into the Australian grid very quickly and with a high degree of sort of certainty and assurance around it. Because it's being run by the Clean Energy Regulator and it's being used in an existing scheme, which we know and which has people who've been working with it for many, many years. It has certification of installers as well as products baked into it, and it has an inspection and review regime as well. So you can build all of that from scratch, but boy, it's nice when you take advantage of something already built. So again, I'll give them a pass on the fact that technically batteries aren't renewable, and we're just glad to see it come together like this.
Yeah, I guess it's better than inventing a pink bat scheme in 3 months and trying to roll it out. Basically, we've had years of experience with the small scale scheme, and adding batteries to it seems like a pretty easy one.
Yes.
Now let's talk a bit about VPPs, virtual power plants. For those that are not familiar with the acronym, basically it's a way of aggregating lots of small systems. So all these people are getting batteries in their homes through an agent that can control them, i.e. tell them when to charge and discharge, can create a massive battery system. And it's distributed across all the homes, and it's ideally located where the energy is being generated, on the roofs of people's homes. So VPP is what we call that aggregation, a virtual power plant. Now, with the rise of home batteries and VPPs, do you see a need for a new battery storage certificate scheme in itself, or is the one that the government's announced sufficient?
Really good question. And I'd probably say the answer for me has got a few parts to it. Mm-hmm. The first one is we already have such a scheme in New South Wales. We have under the demand, adjacent to the New South Wales Energy Savings Scheme is the Demand Response Scheme. Same administrator, a lot of the same sort of components and so on, but specifically demand response. And so there are two components to that, without trying to make this more complicated than it is. Permanent demand response and on-demand demand response, if you like.
Is that BESS 1 and BESS 2?
That's right. So BESS, Battery Energy Storage System 1, was the scheme that was a battery incentive in place in New South Wales, which up until a few weeks ago we were expecting to be stacked with the federal scheme. And this is where we have a little bit of an unfair advantage in some ways, because we've already created over 1 million perks, or these it's an
acronym, not
another
a perk.
acronym. Yes, these perks are for demand reduction certificates under this scheme, permanent demand reduction certificates. And so we're already quite familiar with the regulations and the specifications around battery installation. So we've had a lot of these conversations and so on already. So that gave us a bit of a run up. So the first sort of part of it is that there's a New South Wales, when they heard about the federal scheme introduction, they decided not to offer stacking. It's part of the New South Wales scheme. Generally, it's not allowed to stack any schemes. There's a couple little exceptions for hot water, but generally it's not allowed. And instead they said, we're going to take that funding and we're going to push it over to what they call BESS 2, but is basically VPP, is responsive demand. So they're saying now that you'll be able to get a bigger incentive on which will be stackable, because it's a different thing. So you'll be able to get the federal cheaper home battery rebate for your home. To put some numbers on it, it might be something like, say you get $4,000 or $5,000 against a 10, 12 kilowatt battery in use from the federal scheme. You were, if you signed up to a VPP in New South Wales, you might have got another $300 or $400. It's now looking like it could be somewhere between $800 to $1,200, $1,300. So again, no money's been lost. It's just been redirected. And so VPPs may become more important. So why would I say may when it sounds like money for nothing? Well, I'm not sure that we're entirely on board that the trust is there with energy retailers, with electricity retailers and with homeowners and people who have spent substantial amount of money on their batteries, and that they necessarily want to give up control of that battery or some large component of it to a third party. I'm sure you've heard this before, but I know
last night.
Yeah,
Yep.
a lot of homeowners who have people I've spoken to who have taken the leap to batteries before it's commercially sensible for them.
Yep.
Have a part of one of the components is, well, I want to be, more. I want to have some backup power. I want to be a bit more self-sufficient, and I want to stick it up the power company. So I should say a lot of them, they're our customers, so I wouldn't be saying that. But I think that's a sentiment that's out there.
Yes.
And so who is going to provide those VPPs? At the moment, it's mostly the electricity retailers with a couple of sort of secondary companies that are involved in there, and people like Amber and so on, and Tesla have a big virtual power plant in South Australia. So these are certainly possible, but that would be my wariness around this is people's nervousness about offering up this expensive asset to someone else to manage.
Yeah, I was actually giving a talk to a community group last night about the Cheaper Home Batteries program, and that was one of the questions is, are they going to wear out my battery by cycling it all the time? I tried to calm the horses a bit. I mean, my understanding is it's not necessarily going to be a lot of use. It'll be short bursts of use as the market requires it. It's not like every day your battery will be fully discharged and fully recharged. Yeah.
It certainly shouldn't be.
Yeah. Shouldn't be. Now,
but again, whether people feel like they've got that capability to assess what the offer is,
yeah,
I think clarity, as always, is going to be the real key.
And you're being handsomely reimbursed for that service.
Yes, well, ideally, yeah.
Yeah. So just in summary, the peak demand reduction scheme in New South Wales, BESS 1 will stop at the end of this month.
Tuesday, yep.
On Tuesday, right?
Or Monday night.
But BESS 2 will continue.
Yes, that's
and
right.
So it's stackable, if you want to call it that,
Yep.
On top of the Cheaper Home Batteries program.
That's right.
Got it. Cool.
And it's probably just worth saying at this point that that BESS 2, that scheme in New South Wales, does require you to be connected to a VPP, but the Cheaper Home Battery scheme does not. It just needs you to have a system capable of one day being connected to a virtual power plant.
I've had that
but it
question.
Doesn't have to be.
What does capable mean? Well, if you look at the CEC, actually have a list of inverters that have a facility for VPP, often provided by a third party, not necessarily the manufacturer themselves. So, an agent can create that functionality. They've got a device, could even just be a little box that plugs into your inverter that communicates through the cloud with the VPP operator. Yeah. Cool. So how do the federal policies like the Capacity Investment Scheme, rewiring the nation, influence REC pricing and liquidity?
So it's probably easiest to look at it as the large scale scheme and the small scale. Things like the Capacity Investment Scheme do impact the price of LGCs in the large scale because it encourages more supply into the market. You bring more supply in, you create more certificates, and you still have this finite demand. So you'll find that the price drops. But that needs to be understood as that's a feature. That's not a bug of these white certificate schemes. They are supposed to provide, the price is supposed to reach the lowest point necessary to support the uptake of this technology. So again, that's not to be considered a failure. That's the market working properly in my view. In terms of STCs and the small scale scheme, the battery scheme the Cheaper Home Battery scheme is not intended to directly impact the STC dynamics, the price dynamics, because the way that it's been explained to us so far is that these STCs created for battery installations, they won't just go into the same trough, if you like. They'll be separate. They might be B STCs or something like that, and they will be purchased directly by the regulator via this government funding, via this $2.3 billion. So we don't expect that to directly impact the STC price for PV, but of course we're expecting more PV to be installed as more people come into the market installing batteries. And even the refit, like I can't imagine many people will have someone coming out to talk to them about a battery unless they have a very recently installed system, maybe 2-3 years old, they're probably going to be up for a new inverter or something anyway. Chances are they'll want to take advantage of increasing their panels as well, or either updating or adding more panels to their system. So that sort of secondary effect, we would expect that there will be an uptick in STC supply. Whether that drops the price, it doesn't appear to be. The market is not expecting that to happen. I have got the forward prices for the next 12 months or so, and it's pretty much expecting that we're going to stay at that top level price. So again, little mechanic that nobody might be interested in, but the STC market is capped at $40. When the price gets to that market, the government will create their own, the regulator will create their own certificates for the retailers to buy. And then as we catch up, they'll get taken back out. So we kind of imagine that's a little bit how the battery STCs might work, sort of a bit of a clearing, sort of a zone where the government will just purchase them directly.
Now, just a bit of clarification there. So someone and we're trying to work this out without actually seeing the regulations, just from what the minister has said and his advisors, is that if you've got an existing solar system and an existing inverter, you can add batteries to it, even if it never was designed to have batteries added, if they're AC coupled. So you have basically an AC coupled system is another inverter and a battery that can participate with your existing solar. The other thing that has been said is, as long as the inverter was once on the CEC approved list, so it may no longer be on the CEC approved list, but if it wasn't removed because of a safety issue or a non-compliance issue, you're still eligible to add a battery to it. So it's kind of good news. You don't have to throw away your existing system. We don't want to see a whole lot more e-waste as a result of the scheme. So fingers crossed. What's the regulations say?
Yes, we'll wait and see. But again, additionality, I think, like additional capacity seems like a natural for people.
Yeah.
So we do think STC, there'll be more STCs, but at this stage, not expecting the price to drop a lot. But yeah, again.
I love the fact that on 31st December every year, there's all these panic emails and the scheme's ending tomorrow. No, it's not. It's just a natural, what do you call it? It's not a degradation, but a reduction.
A deeming reduction.
Deeming reduction.
Yeah.
Do we know what the deeming reduction will be for the battery STCs?
No idea.
No idea. Okay.
But we have some theories.
Theories, all right.
So we have this pot of money, $2.3 billion, which is supposed to support 1 million batteries. The question is, what happens if we run out of that sooner? And one of the sort of models we've hypothesized is that despite me just going to pains to explain that battery STCs are separate to the STC scheme, it may well be that they go, well, we're out of money, but we like what this is doing, and battery STCs simply become a component of the small scale scheme. And it all gets mixed in together.
So they become a tradable certificate.
They become a tradable certificate.
Oh, okay.
So again, this is just guesswork.
Right. You heard it here first.
But that would seem like an interesting approach. Once the federal funding runs out, then it goes back to being supported through the small scale scheme. And we would also argue that is a solid rationale for extending the scheme past 2030.
I mean, Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, did say it's uncapped. So, and John Grimes said, try and spend all that money as fast as you can, because we want to see lots of batteries being installed, because it's good for the end user. It's good for renewable energy component of our grid, and it's actually good for grid stability. So it's got lots of wins.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Again, we. Working in this field, you have people who have different opinions about rebates and incentive programs for technology like this. But for me, the batteries is just unequivocally a really sensible and a really strong policy approach, because you've got this. We need to get this in. We need to address this surplus of solar we have in the grid in the middle of the day, which is now potentially causing problems. And then this drop off, this peak has now moved to 5, 6, 7 o'clock sometimes of year. So having batteries in there is good. But the best part is the government doesn't have to site them. It doesn't have to find a building to put them in. It doesn't have to pay for the whole cost. It doesn't have to maintain them. It doesn't have to connect them. And the homeowners will be bearing the brunt of that. So to me, this is one of the quickest ways to get some really high grade distributed grid stability out there. and reshape the power market.
It's kind of like a public PPP.
I think so. Yeah, I wouldn't argue that at all. Yeah.
All right. So, what strategies do you use to hedge against REC price volatility, especially with the increasing renewable penetration and storage adoption?
Yeah. So fundamentally, I've mentioned how the prices can move up and down, and it is a supply and demand kind of arrangement. So it's there are rules, but of course these things don't always follow rules, and you can't be calculated exactly. So our position from a trading perspective is the vast majority of what we do is to protect the prices we offer clients, to smooth out the market and provide access to them. We're not speculators per se. So again, if we, to give you an example, some large-scale systems can take a couple of months to get approval through. What we might need to do is we can pay people pretty much straight away, depending on the model you want. You can get your payment within a day or two, but it might be 2 months, 3 months before we were able to actually create the certificates and then take them to market and then sell them. So if we've offered you a price on an LGC, say of $22 today, we need to protect the business from that being only 15 when we come to sell it in 2 months' time. So our trading team is primarily concerned with addressing that risk by basically selling into the forward market is the bulk of what we do. So we make agreements with retailers and with other counterparties to purchase our certificates at some point in the future.
There's a futures market for certificates.
There is a futures market, a very active futures market for certificates. There's forward purchases and sales, and there's also derivatives. So you can buy an option to sell a certain number of STCs at some point in the future at a certain price. So all of those components are out there and at play behind the scenes.
So that's part of the hedging strategy. Yeah,
that's absolutely. That's what we're trying to achieve, is to smooth that out, to protect the business, and to make sure that we can offer consistent pricing for our clients.
This is probably a related question, but have you ever identified an arbitrage opportunity between the RECs market and energy futures market?
Not necessarily between energy futures and RECs, but there are opportunities from time to time that come up, certainly in terms of, when you see a market dynamic coming, when you hear about an announcement coming, when you see demand surging, there's definitely opportunities to be on the right side of changes. But again, you've got to be a little careful, and we take a prudent approach to it. We're an Australian financial services licence holder, so we have quite strict requirements on us to maintain capital and to make sure that we're tracking our exposure and we're not putting the business at risk.
Is it similar to being a bank?
It's very similar to being a bank. Little bit of a bank.
Little bit of a bank. Yeah. Oh wow! Without the government guarantee.
Yes, I'm a bank escapee. So yeah, we're not quite a bank, thankfully, but yeah.
All right. Okay. So, how might the home battery incentives alter the STC creation process? Things like eligibility for solar and storage systems.
So again, just to caveat it for the third time, we haven't seen the final specs yet.
Yeah.
But again, with our experience, probably the first thing that's come up that we have questions about, and we're sort of at the moment seeking some more information, is the installers being permitted to install 2 systems per day. To be able to sign off on 2 systems. Current information we have is that the regulator is considering those 2 systems to be 1 battery, 1 solar system, as opposed to 2 separate battery solar systems. So we would argue that that's actually a reduction in capability. That's moving away from installers being able to commission 2 systems. We often find nowadays that there are certainly installers working on their own or in very small teams, but there are also installers working in larger teams where commissioning 2 sites in a day is very practical and very doable. So we're looking for a bit more information on that at the moment.
I think in the briefing I saw just recently, there were like 4 different options. 2 solar plus batteries, 2 solar only, 1 battery, 4 commissionings, but no
installs.
No installs. Yeah. So
they're talking about a catch-up period.
Yeah.
So
for the next month or so.
Yeah, for the next month, so that because of having announced that you can go out and fit the batteries, just don't turn them on. There is this sense that the intention is that you'll be able to go out and commission them more quickly. But again, that's I don't have the final answer on exactly how many you can do. So please watch the space, work with your regulator, your industry body, or with your certificate aggregator if you work with someone like us. And as soon as we have a definitive answer, we'll share that with you.
I guess the time leading up to Tuesday has been the most difficult for installers because it's been a bit ambiguous about what they have to do, particularly your stackable batteries that you actually need to do something to them to wake them up to make sure that they're safe.
Yes. We've just heard, we had a client call a couple of days ago with, again, we're technology agnostic, but this was the Sigergy product, an all-inclusive unit, inverter, power management and battery, I believe. And they described how, again, I'm not on the technical side, but they described how, as you said, they had to wake up the battery to commission and make sure the product was safe. And then they shut it off, but they're going, I don't know how do I prove that I've shut it off? How do I prove that we're not drawing power from it in the meantime? And that's one of those questions that we're going to have to work through. But the approach of the regulator has always been sensible. The clean energy regulator, in terms of reviewing these projects, has always taken a pretty common sense approach. And I'm certainly not expecting them to be lenient, but I am expecting them to listen to us and to give us a chance to provide the proof where necessary, to be flexible about how that proof is provided, because as of today, we still don't know exactly what that has to look like.
I know with your New South Wales team and managing the PDRS, the National Carbon Bank team, the compliance is really strict
Yes.
for this program, and they have to kind of vet every installation with pictures to make sure they're compliant to standards, etc. Do you imagine the same was going to apply for the cheaper home batteries program?
I do, and I'm unapologetic about that in general, because the regulators, very rarely do they actually go beyond the Australian standards in these cases of installations. So a few years ago, some of the lighting activities in some of the state-based schemes had sort of additional requirements, but my sort of position is very much the same. Everything that's being asked should be in play. So things like being mounted, not being on a habitable room wall, or having appropriate barriers between, distance from doorways, bollards in place if it's in a garage. What we're finding is it's the silly stuff that trips people up in New South Wales. It's not putting the stickers where they're supposed to be visible, not tagging things correctly. It's the sort of thing that I think everybody knows, and it might well be within the industry that it's accepted practice that, well, yeah, look, the spec might be 300 millimetres, but if there's a better spot 350 millimetres away, that's fine. You just can't expect the regulator. They're not technical specialists. You can't expect them to be able to interpret that with the same skill as an electrician or installer of 20 or 30 years experience. So they simply have to say, here's the rule, as we interpret it, stick to the rule, and there'll be no reason for any problems.
I like the fact that in New South Wales, a garage opening is considered a doorway, only in New South Wales, and therefore you've got to stay 600 mils away from it, but not in any other state. So you've got to be state aware of all the compliance issues as well. I guess your team has got a head start, really. You're having dealt with the PDRS,
yeah.
So that they're the hot shots.
Well, we certainly we've seen a lot of this. But to be broader than that too, Glenn, we've seen a lot of this over the years, over the many years. And generally speaking, we've had these same conversations with really experienced plumbers with hot water systems and not lagging the hot pipes correctly. We are not saying whether it's necessary or not. We are not saying whether this is the correct approach. We are just saying that you are not carrying out a hot water install, you're carrying out a scheme compliant hot water install.
Because as the creator of the certificates, you're the responsible party, not the plumber.
That's correct. So depending on the scheme, I think it comes up from time to time. People say, well, what happens if there's a problem discovered later? The first thing that happens is we surrender the certificates. And that could be, if that's 100 certificates,
Ouch.
we send 100. If it's 10,000 certificates, we surrender 10,000 certificates. And then we start the investigation and we work out what went wrong and we take it from there. But we can't afford to turn the creation tap off while we fight with a regulator over something. We need to address it in the moment and then, move through it from there. So ideally, if our client, if we're able to engage with them and we can work out what went wrong and we can get our money back, terrific. But nonetheless, we can't afford to have our reputation and our relationship with the regulator damaged.
So I guess now you're going to be effectively bundling STCs with battery STCs, and the compliance requirements of those together. So it's going to be a little bit challenging.
I mean, the excuse me, the selfies will be an interesting one. We're expecting there to be selfie photos required for batteries, whether they're the same ones, whether there'll be a separate one. These are all questions we're getting from installers right now. And we hope to have more clarity over the next 48 hours. So
I mean, we being the solar industry, the most regulated industry in Australia, I reckon. I mean, how many other trades have to do selfies to prove they were there?
Yes, it's very, very different. So we'll see.
But I guess the intent from the regulator's perspective is to avoid, fake creation of certificates. And certainly when there is, let's call it free money around, it brings in some bad sorts.
It does.
And so they're being very cautious.
Look, I would probably say that no matter how crazy you think a requirement of a particular regulator might be, it's only there. None of them like more work. It is only there because somebody circumvented the system and forced them to put that requirement in. So we were talking before about how many systems an installer can install per day. The record we saw was 32 in Sydney before that rule was put in. So if you're wondering why we have these rules, it's generally because somebody has tried to cheat the system. It's not because regulators love putting additional rules for no reason.
Well, they're just lazy on their paperwork. They just, at the end of the month, they decided to do all the paperwork on that day.
That's where these were called super installers back in the day, was how we tagged them. And the whole idea of limiting the number of systems that can be commissioned in today came from that fact that blatant misuse of that.
I did have an installer boast. He did 4 by himself in one day. They were little tiny 1 kilowatt systems. And I said, how could you do that? He said, well, I started in the dark and I finished in the dark.
Yep.
I'd hate to think the quality.
No, very much so. But 32 is a stretch. It's particularly we calculated 600 odd kilometres of distance all day to cover them all. So.
Oh, right. Well, he was also Superman in terms of speed of movement.
Very much.
Yeah. So I guess you have to deal with a lot of stakeholders. So things like, retailers, developers, government. I mean, how do you engage in that sort of whole policy world?
So I mentioned Rick's background as having come from the industry group. I think that sort of permeates everything we do. We've talked about the fact that green energy trading can feel like a life support system for Rick's advocacy work. So again, we're not a not-for-profit, but we certainly are very, very engaged and committed to what we're trying to do. And the way for us to do that is, first of all, it begins with customers. It begins with our clients because that's where we learn what's actually going on out in the real world. We engage very deeply with government and regulatory bodies, and we try. We're a prolific consultation report writer and responder. We always try to have a space there, and if there's a chance to be physically present and speak up for the industry, we never miss it. Never miss a chance. And even our trade relationships with retailers gives us a bit of a we have quite a wide perspective of the market because to do what we do, we have to engage with everybody along the way, and of course the industry bodies. So we're deeply involved with it. In this context, as regards solar and batteries, I think the Smart Energy Council's really been living up to its name and giving us as much information and having the discussions out there at the moment. And I would also say, I'm sure it's not a secret to say that everything you're discussing and Smart Energy Council are talking about, they're working actively with the regulator and the government to, this is not just going into some vacuum. They would be feeding that back, and that will form part of how this scheme works. So this scheme itself, it basically was, the first I saw this was 2023, was a paper, actually Rick and Tristan, another fellow of Green Energy Group of Green Energy Markets, put together a paper on adding batteries into the STC scheme. That got picked up by Allegra Spender and New South Wales Teal Independent and put forward as a private members bill. and a lot of behind the scenes work and socialization of that. We ended up, and again, not suggesting that idea wasn't coming from a whole variety of places, but yeah, sometimes things take a long time to work their way through, but the results can be really worth it.
You mentioned green energy markets. I seem to remember you also were commissioned by the government to do modelling on the demand for certificates.
That's correct. Green energy markets, I don't work in that business, but over the years, I don't know if they're still carrying out that particular function, but they certainly have contributed to setting the small technology percentage, or STP, which is the STC target that's set every year.
So you've got to predict what the target will be, and then that will influence the pricing of STCs.
It can do, yeah,
Right.
yeah. It influences the demand, and then the supply side is the other big variable. So
okay.
yeah.
Now you mentioned that super installer. I mean, do you come across fraud very often? Is it something that you have to identify?
Yes, not as much as we used to, and I think it's just. But I'm constantly amazed. Constantly surprised by the lengths people will go to. It's really to the point with a lot of these schemes where there's plenty of profitable business available without worrying about being sent to jail over it or whatever, just for doing things right. But there's always someone who thinks that they're smarter, or who thinks that they can find an angle and have a go. And so that's what, unfortunately, a bit like what I talked about, the regular adding rules, that's why we add rules, that's why we add extra requirements, and why things are harder is because we have to try to protect all of us from those sort of unscrupulous actors. And some of the stories we can see that we've seen out in the past, you cannot imagine how that could possibly have been cost effective to carry out some of these scams, but we're seeing some great stuff in hot water systems at the moment, under the commercial activity, with people putting, manifolding up 5 or 6 hot water pumps that are panel beaters, replacing a little 50 litre under bench unit with 4 or 5 units outside. And yeah, so there are always opportunities for this to happen. So we're watching that. One thing we are looking at is the battery sizing. So you mentioned right off the cuff that incentives are available up to the first 48 kilowatts of battery, 50 kilowatts of battery, and for batteries that go up to 100, but incentive just for the first 50. So as we probably imagine that the biggest cost is getting someone out there on site, doing the wiring, and carrying out the necessary upgrade. The battery itself, once you've got the first sort of 5 kilowatts, extra capacity is probably not that expensive. And so that's one thing that we're going to be watching, is to see the size of batteries that are going in. So I think the modelling to date has predicted that it's 12 kilowatt hour batteries, roughly that 10, 12, 13 kilowatt hour sort of home size, but might actually be incentivised to put much larger batteries on homes. So whether that's sensible or an appropriate use of the funds or whatever, we're going to see how that plays out.
Just coming back to the fraud point, it's a little bit of Schadenfreude. If you want to revel in people's misfortune, you can go to the Clean Energy Regulator's website and look under enforceable actions, I think it's called.
Yes, enforceable undertakings.
Undertakings, and there's a name and shame list there of what people have done. So, beware. They actually employ former federal police to do investigations. They've got serious powers to take criminal action. Generally, it means having to repay the certificates, or also sometimes the work itself has to be redone. Can be a very expensive mistake. So, forewarned. Okay, so how might virtual power plants impact on REC trading if home batteries become a grid source?
Home batteries being a grid source, I think, again, it may not directly impact the REC markets a lot, but it will definitely impact energy markets. Mm-hmm. And we've already seen the introduction of the big battery in South Australia completely change the short-term demand market and the Now, you're going to ask me for the acronym, the FCAS, frequency control and...
I do actually know it.
Yeah. What's the back end of that?
Frequency control and ancillary services.
Ancillary services market. So basically like a grid firming, is that a reasonable way to describe it? It's
a suite of solutions, but typically when the grid's under stress, whether it's frequencies going a little bit off 50 hertz, it's a time to jump in and try and support it. So firming, yeah.
Gotcha. So those markets have been affected by batteries because batteries react really quickly.
Yeah.
Quicker than you can spin up a gas turbine or some of our other more conventional ways.
There's 4 levels of FCAS, and the fastest is 1 second. You have to respond within 1 second of the call. Yeah.
And that's really only batteries or synchronous like spinners or anything can do that?
It has to be something online.
Yeah.
There's no time to switch things. So it's certainly no time to start up a coal-fired power station.
No. So certainly like we can already see the impact of where, and I would only see that getting bigger.
Yeah.
But really the impact from a consumer point of view, it should be cheaper power prices for everybody.
Yeah.
And this is often one... we are quite concerned about the access to scheme incentives for low income earners and renters, and it doesn't always seem like it's as straightforward for them to get access. But there is benefits to the grid and benefits to the overall pricing stability that benefit everybody. And so that's where this comes back, and we would expect that again, soaking up some of the excess capacity in the middle of the day and cutting down some of that excess demand in the evenings should make power prices better for everyone. And in fact, anybody can go on to ASX Energy is the website. And if you look up, I think you Google ASX Energy Futures, will give you the forward price in each state for what wholesale power is looking like over the next few years. And you should see it's coming down. So this is already priced in many cases. So now we've just got to make it happen.
Actually, I'm going to share a little embarrassing moment to explain FCAS. I was in a standards committee meeting once, and I turned to a senior network engineer next to me, and I just said during the break, I said, what's the right balance between generation and consumption? And he looked at me slightly aghast and said, exactly the right balance. So when you think about it, we've got possibly the biggest grid in the world. If you go from Cape York through to far reaches of South Australia, all one electrically connected network with thousands of loads and generators all participating into the same electrical network, and it has to stay very smooth. It has to stay at 50 hertz, very stable voltage. It's a miracle, and that's where batteries are coming in to help with that.
It is quite fascinating, and if you've travelled to Southeast Asia or in any developing country and seen, they don't take stable grid power for granted. Like any substantial business
or even continuity.
No, that's exactly right. They'll have generators and battery backups and everything else. So, we are a lucky country.
Yeah. So, how would the Cheaper Home Batteries program align with things like emissions targets and the national battery strategy?
So the key advantage I see of having batteries is, again, we know that it's not creating energy. We know that it's not a renewable energy source, but it's enabling us to use more of the renewable energy source we generate on our own roof. So first of all, using it locally probably is going to result in substantially less losses. So that's an advantage. But the big advantage is if you're using more of your own power, you're not drawing power from the grid, which is still more than 50% a black grid. So that's less coal-fired power that needs to be generated to cover you in the evenings, as opposed to before you had your battery installed. So I'd say that as the biggest advantage of it. And in terms of national battery targets, I think that's going to continue to evolve and continue to. But again, I tend to favour set the target, give industry certainty about where you're going, and then let industry come in and solve this. We've never had a big problem in Australia with attracting investment for well-established, well-known technologies and so on in renewables. We just need to give businesses that sort of certainty and take away any sovereign risk, any sense that a change in government is going to roll back their access to markets and so on. So certainty, I think, is really what people want more than at the larger scale. I think they want certainty more than anything else.
I think there's a another benefit of the cheaper home battery scheme that hasn't really been articulated, which is resilience. When you add storage, particularly because most inverters that have batteries provide backup as well, you've now got your independent power system for next time there's a storm, loss of grid power. And it can actually benefit the networks as well. So in New Zealand, because I go there quite a lot, Vector, which is one of the biggest DNSPs, they call them lines companies in New Zealand, I love that. They did a trial some years ago where they gave or very cheaply supplied battery systems to about 500 customers as an experiment, so solar and batteries. And one of the learnings from that was that when there was an incident like a storm and a tree came down, they didn't have hundreds of people calling them at the same time saying, I've lost power. They knew they'd lost power because, of course, they monitor their network, and they had a longer time to fix the problem, so it wasn't so chaotic, and the customer was less affected. So there's a win-win.
I could absolutely see that, yes.
Cool. So eligibility now, look, we keep having to make up stuff because we don't know what the rules are, but there's been a lot of pre-releases from government. So we're pretty confident the eligibility it's not means tested, so it's not based on your income.
No, that's correct, no means testing. You can have one claim per household, so it doesn't have to be the first battery in the household, but you only get one shot at it. Which is another reason we suspect that people probably go bigger rather than smaller. It's got to be minimum 4 kilowatts or minimum 5 rather. So if you have an existing battery, you can top it up to it has to be above 5 for. I
think you have to add
at least 5
kilowatt
yes.
hours. Yep.
It got to be the no larger than 100 kilowatts. And that's what we sort of know.
And you can be off-grid. So there was a little kind of confusion of where you had to be VPP capable, which makes no sense off-grid because you've got nowhere to send it. And then they dropped that requirement for off-grid.
Yeah.
In the later announcements.
Again, I haven't. I'm waiting to see to believe it all until I see it all in black and white. But yeah,
I have a solution.
Yes.
So after I've published this and then the regulations come out, I'll put a link to it with some of the changes that we're sort of hypothesising.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So you'll get the good juice. So and so you can be a business, you can be a private individual. If you move houses, I wonder if you can get it again on your new house. Is it per NMI, for instance?
My understanding is that it's per site, that it's not linked to the person. So yes, I believe that you move house, you can set up again, and I'm sure a lot of people would do that. Certainly, I know anecdotally a lot of people do that with solar. Once they've had it, they're not going to live without it, and so they move to their new place, and it's the first thing they do. Yeah.
One of the other concerns has been, as soon as there's an incentive, often you'll see a rise in prices because there's a bit more, a bit less competition in a way. That'll be interesting to see if that's true, because what we've seen over the last decade is just a continuing reduction in the price of solar and batteries because of the huge manufacturing base that's out there now. So, I guess it's kind of going to be watch this space.
I think you're absolutely right. And we haven't really seen the drop in installed price of home batteries that we might have seen in terms of the drop in per kilowatt hour price of, say, car vehicle batteries, for argument's sake, or large scale. So the plastic box can't be that expensive. There's got to be some savings there somewhere, and I expect that's what we'll see. We might get some, a few people trying different things as this product launches, as this new incentive launches, but I think it will bring more competition into the market, more suppliers will want to access, and it almost certainly will drive prices down.
Yeah. I mean, even though it's a very small part of the market, there is a certain amount of Australian manufacture of batteries too. So there's going to be a little bit of, direct benefit to Australian manufacturers of battery systems. Yes. Though I have heard some grumbles about there was no local content requirements. So,
it's always a tricky one.
Yeah.
Again, it would be fantastic. I would certainly like to see more investment in Australia and more value add for us, for our minerals. We'd love to be more than just a miner. I'd certainly love to see more of that.
Yeah, actually, just circling back to VPPs, a question I got last night at this community meeting was, how much benefit will I get from a VPP? Is there any modelling to show that?
I think that all of the, I don't have it, is the short answer for me, but I think more it's a case of what how much control and how much capacity of your battery are you giving away, and how much are you getting paid for it? So I've heard of one of the products out there, just read an article that talked about that person earning $70 in a day in the middle of summer. So that's a substantial amount of money. It's not $70 every day, to be clear, but it shows that there is some genuine value there for people if they're aligned with the right partner in the VPP space. And I think you sort of made a good point before too. We were talking about, it's not like you will be giving away all of your battery control to this third party. Our understanding of the VPP rules in under the New South Wales scheme, we can't find a floor. We can't find a minimum level that you have to give to your VPP provider to be viable, to be part of it. So we don't know whether that means you have to give them 1% for 1 minute a month, or whether that, we're still working out exactly what that means.
But there's a participation fee with most VPPs.
Yeah, so there might be a point at which it's not cost effective for the VPP supplier, but I expect we could see some innovative sort of solutions. I mean, for argument's sake, do you care what happens with your battery when you go on holidays for 3 weeks? You might be able to, that might contribute something, and that might be quite valuable to you. So it might not be just a simple, we want 20% of your battery, we'll never take it below 20%. It might be something, we might see some more, sort of bespoke solutions coming out.
Yeah, well, look forward to it. I mean, being an off-grid person, I never get to play with VPP, so I only hear it secondhand. So we've had a fairly wide-ranging conversation here. Luke, is there anything that I haven't covered that's kind of relevant to you?
There's I think probably our main interest is just to see that the industry continues to do the right thing, that we look after each other, and we make sure that that we don't give. There's a certain section of the press that likes to cane and give us a bit of a flogging over anything that we try to do in this space. So again, just keep it clean, keep it tidy, keep safe installations for people. Be open and upfront about what the battery and the solar system can and can't do for people, so we don't set unrealistic expectations, and we continue this groundswell of positive energy that there is for solar, and we add to it with battery. So that's all I would like to see.
Well, Australia is currently the highest per capita installer of solar in the world. Maybe we'll be the highest per capita of batteries.
Certainly, residential batteries. I think that's a very significant move, and again, it just goes to show that we can be a really significant player with good policy.
Cool. Well, thanks, Luke.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Okay. Lovely to see you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Cool.